You may or may not remember the housing conundrum, so let's review it. You want to buy a house in a neighborhood. The house you're looking at is listed at $235,000. Your realtor tells you that for homes in this neighborhood, the mean sales price of homes in the neighborhood is $250,000. What does this mean about houses in your future neighborhood? Well, we've looked at this previously with measures of central tendency. Now we want to look at it with measures of spread or variability. So scenario 1, the possible home prices are as follows, and they range from $53,000 all the way up to $1 million. So a pretty high spread if we're just thinking about it. In scenario 2, our home values are much closer together, ranging from $210,000 to $305,000. Let's calculate the mean absolute deviation for each scenario. The mean in both scenarios is $250,000. We're going to use the mean absolute deviation formula for this. So what you do is you take each data point, you subtract the mean from it, and then you take the absolute value. Those calculations are shown here. After you do that, you sum those deviations and you divide by how many data points you had. In this case, we had 6. So our MAD, or our mean absolute deviation, is $250,000. So what does a MAD of $250,000 mean? Well, it means that the average spread of the housing prices is $250,000. We often report that within one deviation above and below the mean is typical. Remember, the mean was $250,000. So one deviation below the mean would be $0, and one deviation above the mean would be $500,000. So this spread is very large. We may not realize that if we're only given the mean prices in the neighborhood, we need a measure of spread to go along with it. Let's look at scenario 2, where our houses were closer together. Again, we'll use the formula. Take each data value, subtract the mean from it, find the absolute value, sum those, and find the average. In this case, our mean absolute deviation is $35,000. So what does a MAD of $35,000 mean? A MAD of $35,000 means that the average spread of the housing prices is $35,000. Again, we often report that one deviation above and below the mean is typical. So if we do one deviation below the mean, we get $215,000. If we do one deviation above the mean, we get $285,000. So in this case, you can see the prices range is much, much closer together. Given that mean absolute deviation of $35,000 gives us a better picture of scenario 2. So when we're interpreting these, the smaller the MAD, the closer or the more clustered the data is around the mean. The larger the MAD, the more spread our data is. So in scenario 1, which we knew just by looking at that, our spread is much larger. In scenario 2, our spread is much smaller. In other words, scenario 1 are more spread out. Scenario 2 are closer together. The mean absolute deviation is a precursor to standard deviation. It's used in middle school because the calculations are easier. It is a standard in middle school where you have to be able to compute and interpret the mean absolute deviation. It's not until high school that we get into standard deviation. We'll discuss that next.